I'm glad you chose the best track for the afternoon. Chose wisely. That one? What's that? Okay, let's go back. Okay, great. Thanks. So this afternoon we're going to focus on canal tourism, and I'm going to talk specifically about a visitor profile research that we completed in the last year. And I'm not going to share so much of the results of that research as I am going to talk about the process of doing it, why we did it, what we learned, and what might be valuable for you to take away from the work that we did to understand our visitors a little bit better. So we all have similar challenges and opportunities with canals. And so I think one of the great parts about them is that we can attract all kinds of visitors, from very local people to international travelers. We're serving boaters and cyclists and vacationers and adventurers and people who just want to explore their heritage. And then we also see on our canal a lot of people who want to achieve a big journey and do many miles of travel. And so we have all of these great opportunities to connect people with communities and with the waterway. But we've also got some challenges. And one of the biggest ones is that our canals are very porous, hopefully not physically, but that people come and go. And we don't often know where they start or where they leave or what they do when they come here because we're not really able to track that kind of information. And so we don't have a single entry point or a single way to really understand who our visitor is. We want to engage the audience, but we don't always know who the audience is. So I work on the Erie Canal, and that's a waterway in New York State in the US, and the centerpiece of the larger canal system, a larger waterway. So we'll zoom in on that and you can see what that looks like. So the area in the sort of shaded green is my territory in the Erie Canalway National Heritage Corridor. It's an 800-kilometer waterway with an adjacent 600-kilometer off-road trail network for cyclists and hikers. The system links more than 200 communities along the waterway. So it's a big territory that we're talking about here. So think about the Erie Canalway National Heritage Corridor as like a long linear national park. And the waterway itself is owned and managed by the state of New York. The land along it is privately held, it's municipalities, it's farmland, all kinds of uses, probably like your canal systems. And so the National Heritage Corridor's role is in many ways to provide cohesion for that corridor. And that's why we have that sort of green band, that's sort of the boundary with which the canal has had influence, and that's the area that we're really wanting to focus in on. And so we play a coordinating role to try to help communities and sites preserve our canal heritage, to promote the waterway as a world-class tourism destination, and also to try to foster vibrant communities that are connected along this waterway. You'll see here again, there's no single entry or exit point. So it's not like going to another national park where you go through a ticket booth and you get the map and they say welcome and they ask you your zip code or where are you from, and so suddenly you have some data. We don't really have that kind of opportunity. So 2 years ago, we set out to do a visitor profile study. So I'm going to share how we did it and offer some of the lessons that we learned to better attract and serve our visitors. Oh, what happened there? So I'm going to just start with a little confession to say I really did not want to do a visitor survey. And I have cycled the waterway from end to end 3 times. I've been on canal boats and barges and canoed the waterway many, many times over my tenure of 11 years with the Erie Canalway National Heritage Corridor. I've visited and worked with almost every canal historic site. So in some ways, I feel like I do kind of know our visitor. But I'm an educator by nature. I'm not really a statistics person. I'm not an expert marketer. And I wanted some money to create some new educational materials. And so I went to the Division of Tourism for New York State to ask for a grant for some tourism materials, and they said, well, have you ever done a visitor profile study? And we had to say, well, no, we haven't. And they said, well, why don't you write that into your grant, because we'd like to fund that so that you can learn more about your visitors and maybe tailor your program materials better. So that was kind of the genesis of how this study came about. And so now not only was I going to write the materials, but I also had to manage the visitor study as well. So we started with the funding from New York State, and we sort of thought, okay, so what is it that we really do want to know? We wanted to know who visits, and by nature then, who doesn't visit? Where do they go? What activities do they do? What do they think of their experiences? And we wanted to know how much they spend, and what are the best methods for reaching out to them. And I also really wanted to know what role events play in bringing people to the canal system. We had done a study in 2007 that looked at events and tours and the economic impact of that, and I thought it's really time. We've had so much growth and so many new activities. I really wanted to see what the event numbers were going to be like. The second thing that was really helpful was to think about what our objectives were for the study. So we wanted to be able to hone the survey. So it wasn't just a general tourism study, but I really wanted to know about canal tourism specifically, so that we could better target our own marketing, improve our communications, look at how we could provide better visitor services, improve the waterway based on what visitors told us they needed, and then advocate for new canal investments based on the economic impact data. So to do this project, we hired an outside agency to help us, a consulting firm, to help us shape the survey and actually run things. So that part, we put out a request for proposals. We reviewed about 15 different proposals and interviewed 5 firms before we selected one. And what was surprising was how different each proposal really was in terms of the methodology. Some people were going to do online surveys. Some people were going to go out and interview people along the waterway. And so it was very interesting to see that diversity of methodology and then sort of pick what we felt was really going to get us the results that we wanted. So the firm we chose had experience in tourism research and quantitative research. They also had qualitative background, but not so much in canal-related work. So we worked with them quite a lot to try to, again, kind of hone things so that we would find out what we wanted to know. They did an online survey where we had about 1,000 respondents. We had people who live and visit the corridor who live along it. We had people who came from away. We had people from neighboring states. So we wanted not just people who had visited, but we also had people who had not visited. So we had quite a diverse mix in that 1,000, and then we followed up with in-depth interviews with 20 people. And we sweetened the pot a little bit by giving them a gift card for maybe $50. So that was helpful in getting those in-depth interviews. And the in-depth part really kind of helped confirm what we were seeing in the broader survey. We didn't find anything that was jarring between the two. They really came together. And then we did this separate piece on the economic impact of events and tours. All right. So our findings. The results we got gave us 115 pages of data that looked like this. There were pages and pages of charts and graphs. So we learned our visitor profile, their vacation style profile, where they came from, where they went, where they entered, where they left. We had information about our recent visitors, about our prospective visitors. There was loads and loads of detailed information that we got from the study. We also got loads of comments. There were a lot of open-ended questions, and so people wrote in what they liked best, where they went, all kinds of things, feedback, things that would be better, and we had loads of comments from our qualitative parts of the survey. But here's what happened. When our consultants presented the results to our board of directors and our close partners, their eyes, I just saw it, they just glazed right over. And it was way too much detail for people to take in. It was really clear to me that very few people were going to read our press release and go to our website and download 115 pages and really look at it. There are some people who did that, but I think there were probably, I could count them on one hand, and I was one of them. So I thought, you can't do a big study like this and have an audience of one. So I realized that one big lesson learned, don't assume that people want to read your results. We needed to make it easier. And this was the part of the project that I really had not anticipated going into it. I thought, oh, all right, we do the study, we get the results, and great, now we know what to do and people will be really interested. Not so much. So I went online and I used a program called Pictochart. And I took a lot of the statistics and I translated what I felt were the most important ones into a more graphic presentation. So here you see what was the size of the party and who visited. And I took that information and I just sort of made it a more graphic, easy thing. So people could say, oh, our visitors skew older. They travel more in smaller parties. They spend more money. They have more income. So that people could more quickly sort of see the results. Here's kind of another example of what did they spend. And you have, another page of blue and gray charting. And I just sort of quickly could show people that people from outside spend way more money. So it's important to not just attract local people to our canal. Even with statistics, I was able to kind of change them from just the straight bar chart to something that's a little more graphic and let some of the numbers really jump out. So when people were looking at the results, they could kind of really quickly get a feeling for what the most important information and takeaways were. So once I had done that translation, I decided to take it on the waterway. And I thought, well, who benefits from a visitor profile study? Who would want to know this information? So it's tourism agencies, cultural heritage sites, our tour operators, community leaders would be interested in that, some of the visitor centers, tourism businesses. And so I thought, well, how can I reach out to those people and help them get a sense of the study and the results and what it might mean for them? So I did a number of regional outreach forums. So it's a very large corridor. So regionally within that, there are those tourism agencies, communities, and so on, and we invited them to a session in which I presented the results for about a half an hour, and then we spent 45 minutes or so talking amongst ourselves. So within those regions, some of the people that were in the room knew each other and worked together a lot, and other times there were people who really did not work together, didn't know one another, because you have a lot of individual sites, and their vision is on my site and how can I promote this site, but they're not looking out at the bigger picture. They're not necessarily collaborating with their tourism people, so it was really helpful to have that kind of dialogue. Okay, so the other thing that we did was kind of zero in on what are the key takeaways from the survey. So I pulled out the things that I felt like were really the lessons I wanted our tourism people to know. So, and this is kind of how I structured that. So one of the examples is that we found that knowledge about what people could do on the waterway was barely above neutral. People didn't know that you could bike from end to end. They didn't in some cases, know that the waterway was still open for boaters in the summertime. So those are important things. So our tourism providers could say, okay, we need to keep spreading the word, and there's a variety of ways to do that. We also, another lesson learned for us was we needed to help people connect the dots for our visitors so it was worth a visit, and that an individual site might not draw people from an hour away or 3 hours away or a plane trip away, but if they combined with neighboring sites, they would be a much stronger experience. So the forums that we did really helped grow that kind of tourism collaboration. And again, what we learned in the study is that the more people saw and the longer they stayed, the more they liked their experience along the Erie Canal. And so in terms of the lesson we learned is that our sites have to get connected with the communities, with the adventure experience, and try to have a combination package that really makes people want to come and stay longer and therefore spend more money and have a better experience. And that's now what we're really going to try to focus in on, is those growing those collaborations. And this photo was a bike tour that is happening now, and it's several communities have linked up with tourism heritage sites, and they're offering a multi-day bike tour. So it's really working. So let's just review quickly kind of some key takeaways from our experience. Engaging visitors means getting to know who your visitors are. And I found that it provided confirmation and direction for my work. So it told me the things that I'm doing well and also the things that we need to improve on, and it gave us a good sense of what to do. But the bottom line was that to get the most from your research, you need to plan that you're also going to share that research and have a plan in place to make sure that that happens. We learned from our events that our events are drawing over 3 million people a year with an economic impact of $1.5 billion. That's a huge increase from what we had 10 years ago. And so getting that word out and sharing that result, and then getting people to think about events, really important. And then think about ways that you can translate all those statistics and all those numbers into actionable steps, because people don't have time to read all the stats, but they may have time to take a few key takeaways and make the waterway even better. And I think that's really what we're all after in the end, is making our waterways the best they can be. They're such treasures for us. And I hope that we'll continue to strengthen the Erie Canal, and you'll continue to strengthen your canals so that our waterway network is great worldwide for ourselves and for the next generation as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jean. Our second speaker today is Tadhg MacIntyre. And Tadhg is a lecturer in sport, exercise and performance psychology based at the Health Research Institute, where he conducts research on mental health, well-being, and most recently focused on applying nature-based interventions for well-being.
Thanks.
Over the past 2 decades, Tadhg has consulted with Olympic-level athletes in sports, including rowing and track and field, and he was a sports psychologist for Ulster Rugby between 2014 to 16. In recent years, his research focus has been on developing nature-based interventions for well-being based on the following concepts: nature savouring, restorative natural spaces, green exercise, and nature-based solutions. So I'll hand you over to Tadhg once he's got this set up.
Thank you, and good afternoon. So one of the things that's going to resonate in the talk today is that I have some experience and affiliation with the sport of rugby. What actually isn't in it is that my background is somebody who grew up 50 metres from the River Liffey, spent about 25 years of my life with about 4 hours a day on the water as a kayaker or a canoeist. And I've been lucky enough in that role to travel around the world to rivers, lakes, and different waterways. And I, about 15 years ago, was putting away my paddles and boats to say, okay, that's enough of competition, and I should focus more on finishing my PhD and my other work. And I had some reflections with some colleagues who work within outdoor sports and water sports on what's the role of this on their well-being. This long-term contact with blue, for example, with water for well-being. So it's an area of interest for mine for a number of reasons. That's just one of them. So I'm going to take in Journey with some reflection from you as well at different stages. I'll just flip back for a moment, sorry. I'm really interested in your experiences and also in your experiences and understanding of well-being. If we're saying that, being close to nature increases well-being, what do you think well-being is? What is it to you? What's the meaning of it? And what natural spaces in your mind help enhance your own well-being? Where do you go to for quiet space? Where do you go for restoration? Where do you go to feel a sense of calm? And nature does afford us all these different places which evoke different emotions. That's something we'll look at here. So I lead a research group called Go Green X. Go Green X refers to green, which is just one way of referring to the natural green spaces. The reason we're focused somewhat on green is because of rapid urbanization. So the rate of urbanization is so high that it means that many people either have limited access to green natural spaces or they only can access what we call degraded natural environments. So the type of benefits they're getting are diminished. We're part of a funded research group. We write proposals for European projects for amounts of about 4 and 5 million. We develop proposals which look at enhancing well-being in the young, mental health in the workplace. Our most recent submission was on collaboration between China and Europe on how to renature cities. So that's kind of where we're at. We're interested in two pieces: green exercise, so some level of physical activity or movement when you're in a green natural space. And the other piece is what we call blue mind, is what's special about water, those qualities that attract us to spend so much time in that space. The question for you is, what's your favorite natural space? Where do you go to seek restoration, calm, excitement? What is it that drags you to that space? What is the magnet that keeps pulling you back? Is it somewhere near your house? Is it somewhere you have to travel to? We all have these spaces, and some of them are childhood memories, and hopefully some of you, they're recent memories from being on the water here. The second question I have for you, what's your phone image? So this is one of those rare talks where you get told to take out your phone, but do take out your phone if you like. You could share it with the person beside you. Share your phone image. It's likely something what we call, that's part of your identity. So it could be you in a boat, you in water, you with your children or family or friends in a natural space. If it's you winning the trophy in your last sporting encounter, you might have to talk to me afterwards in terms of identity issues, but I'm guessing it's not that. So Blue Mind, this is a concept from an oceanographer, Wallace J. Nichols, who wrote a great book called Blue Mind. It describes a different psychological state that we get when we're connected with water. And that state of connection can be, walking beside water, of which there are a lot of studies that suggest that proximity in terms of habitat, living close to water, has benefits. But the second piece is the type of contact we have with water increases or amplifies the well-being benefits. So scuba diving, surfing, being immersed in water has really major benefits in terms of challenge, resilience, and well-being. So it's not just the access or proximity to it, it's what you do in it. And if you're out on it for a long time, you're in quite a different visual space. And we're interested in the type of visual space. If you compare that to the built environment, spending time in a boat in the Shannon is very different to even sitting beside the Canal on Bagot Street in Dublin. In Ireland, we have a unique situation. We're incredibly lucky in terms of, access to our natural environment. 1.9 million of us live within 5 kilometres of the coast. 40,000 Irish people live within 200 metres of the coastline. They can basically walk out their door, probably in their pajamas, and have a look at the ocean or the sea. That's a really good facilitator for well-being. Now, it's not one that is promoted. There are other things promoted by Healthy Ireland, other agencies, but it's something we need strong evidence about. And I was very interested in the last speaker's, challenges and innovations in collecting and sharing evidence. There's a timeline here. Some of you might have heard of the Harvard biologist E.O. Wilson. So look, there's a history here, but what's happened in the last number of years is the research has accelerated. Europe have put in tens of millions into something called nature-based solutions, which is mitigating interventions in cities to deal with climate change and looking at co-benefits for health and well-being. So we're part of this trajectory. We actually have a book which is due to be finished in the next couple of days. It may have to wait till the end of the month because I'm here. But the reality is this is a changing landscape in terms of research, and it's one we're happy to be part of. There's now funding from different agencies. So, you know, this is a Waterways Ireland funded conference, which Department of Culture and Heritage involved. There's many different actors and stakeholders supporting events like this, and that's crucial. This is not the preserve of Environment Agency or any one agency. It's actually something which we all need to connect with. In terms of funding, that's recognised in terms of environment, health, and different social partners. Mental Health Ireland and others are supporting funding and research in this domain. So what does nature give us? This is about as good a summary I can give you without going into meta-analysis. Essentially, nature gives us a number of benefits, and you know, there's stronger evidence for some of these than others, but increased well-being, that's fairly consistent. Reduced stress, very consistent. Enhanced attention, depending on type of contact. Connectivity. So there's quite a big difference between what we call, you know, the emotional response to going to the gym than to exercising outdoors, if you take just that simple scenario. If you go to the gym, it's asocial, so you probably don't speak to anybody. You have environmental stressors, noise, poor air quality. If you go outdoors, you got good air quality, you got reduced noise, you actually have a natural soundscape, much different multi-sensory environment, a different type of gait when you run. The differences are quite vast. And what actually happens is when you go outdoors and exercise, afterwards you want to speak to somebody else. It increases pro-social behavior. It makes us connect with others. We don't get those benefits from gym-based exercises. We also get a lot more anxieties with gym-based exercise. We do get some risks and anxieties with being outdoors. Irish people have actually a bit of a risk around forest, for example. We've got 11.5% deforestation, one of the lowest in the European Union, which means we see a forest, we go, get me out of here. And if a German person, Suzanne, my research associate here, she's from Germany, a German person isn't in a forest, they say, where is the forest, right? So these differences are quite profound, and cultural differences across Scandinavia, Central Europe, and Ireland, the UK. Resilience is one area where I have a number of my research team working studying resilience. It's really interesting. Essentially, we can perceive a stressor as a challenge or a threat. And depending on how we perceive it, that impacts on our ability to develop resilience. And resilience is something we can get from nature. The co-benefits I'll come back to. But essentially, we have a possibility of converting natural capital, our contact with nature, into psychological capital and social capital. And social capital is that kind of intangible piece which, you know, every politician wants, every major movement for environmental concern or UN Sustainable Development Goals. We want to develop social capital around these key drivers. There's technically, this is called ecosystem benefits for health, but that's a kind of, it's from environmental psychology. It's just one paradigm or lens they use to look at this area. I'm going to take you to just the Irish question, what you call it, is in Ireland, you ask somebody, how are you? Invariably, they will say, I'm grand. I mean, they could have suffered a bereavement, lost a limb, been hospitalized. They could, you know, all sorts of different emotions, and they'll still tell you they're grand, right? Well, that's the challenge of being Irish, right? So nature exposes Irish people to a whole rich family of emotions, positive emotions typically. And that nature experience means we're more likely to use, you know, positive language to discuss our mind state. So it changes our connectivity and our expression of our emotions, and that's quite powerful. Because of nature, we can say how we really feel, and I think that's quite important. Just a short lesson on mental health. If you know what mental health is, you can kind of tune out for a moment. You can think about the really interesting last speaker. If you're with me, basically, it's not the absence of mental illness. There's another axis or spectrum. It's what we call the well-being spectrum. And that ranges from what you can see here, thriving to languishing. Languishing is what you hear adolescents, people much younger than me, when they say, how are you doing? And they say they're meh. Okay, that means they're actually melancholy. So they're just a bit down, but they're not suffering from any major psychological distress. They're just not clapping their hand and bouncing around the place. And the other end is thriving. We can be thriving. We can be succeeding and doing really, really well. And knowing that is important. And actually, thriving and working on that aspect of our lives is a protective factor for mental health risk. Mental health is a whole pile of comorbidities if you look in terms of physical challenges around inactivity, sedentary behavior, etc. Psychological recovery is what it says on the tin. It's this unwinding that allows us to return to prior level of stress, a prior stressor level after being exposed to some stress. Geographers talk about therapeutic landscapes. It's not a word that we use in psychology. I'm a psychologist because it's a little bit of a high bar to say that you get therapy from natural settings. You can, but maybe not everybody can access that. Recovery means from a sense of detachment, and you'll see that in a video in a moment, to mastery or overcoming challenges in your environment. Nature gives us all different environments in which we can develop our psychological recovery. And this is pretty important in the world of work. I imagine many of you suffer, from stress in your workplace. Having different ways to deal with that stress by accessing nature would be useful. Resilience, I won't dwell on that, but suffice to say, it's a little bit about proactive behavior, not just reactive. So it's a little bit about preparing for something, some future stressor. Now I'll take you to kind of why I'm here with Blueways and funded by Waterways Ireland as part of this work. So we've been part of a project which is funded by their Heritage Grant Scheme, and it's to listen to the voices, and you won't hear so much today, you'll get to see some of the data, of different people that are, we call them athlete ambassadors and community champions. So these are nature experts in the sense they're out there doing it, they're doing all sorts of different experiences. So Chris Bryan is one of my PhD students, and he's actually an open water swimmer for the last 15 or so years, would have been Olympic squad 2012. We have a consultant, Humphrey Murphy, who actually works in the outdoors developing Blueways, who's climbed Everest and is an avid kayaker. We have Rosie Foley, who's maybe the better known member of the Foley family, whose brother Anthony passed away as coach of Munster. We have Niamh Briggs, who's former nominee for World Player of the Year, Irish rugby captain when they beat the All Blacks, which they did before the men's team did. And we have Jim Kennedy, who's kayaked around Ireland and won many endurance kayaking races, apart from running a commercial enterprise in Cork. And we interviewed these are part of 19 interviews. These are just some of the ones which focus on Blueways. And it's for our book and some publications funded by Waterways Ireland. And we wanted to hear their experiences, to use them as role models for participation. They could be used by local sport partnerships, by Sport Ireland, by different bodies to promote use of our waterways and our greenways. I'm just going to give you a video example. This is Niamh Briggs, who suffered some fairly horrific injuries. Her injury profile was such that when Ireland held the World Cup, you can see here on this scale here, she's very high on confusion and fatigue. This is still in a recovery trajectory. She spent a year recovering from injury prior to the World Cup, told the weekend beforehand as captain she wouldn't be able to play. So that's fairly devastating, but she's still back playing for Munster at the moment and hoping to make impact in the national team again. And it's part of the challenge of sport. Injury is part of that landscape. So this is a picture here of our seaside at home, Abbeyside in Waterford, and near Dungarvan. And now we're going to see her on the Blueway at Tadhg.
contact session and it's all bish bash, and when you come out to something like this, it's different. It's just another take on it. I think, whether you're swimming or paddling or whatever it is, it's just another mindset of, you're still active, you're still out there, you're still getting into something that you want to do, but it's away from that kind of poor contact and heaviness that's probably associated with rugby.
So that's one person describing their own restorative space. This idea of mapping emotions to spaces is interesting. We can find natural spaces, and there's research just on different attributes we use to define these favorite places. Are they restorative, reflective, energizing, fun, social, challenging? Do you go there to meet people? Do you go there to be alone? So natural spaces can have a variety of different functions for us, but it's really important to map these and understand where you can access them in your neighborhood, because that can help you manage your own well-being. This is kind of how it works. This is kind of a little complicated piece, but essentially direct engagement with nature or direct contact means you're out there, authentic nature, you're in it. And indirect is looking at pictures on your phone or looking at a video or looking at a video, for example, of nature. And they have different impacts shown by the relative size of the icons here. The bigger smiley face shows a bigger impact. So the research evidence suggests that we have a stronger impact from direct contact than indirect contact. So we say there's a value in both. Not everybody can access nature in a holistic way all of the time. What's really interesting is the keynote this morning, the first keynote talked about, climate change. So we are all part of this solution and problem. And part of this is what we call environmental concern, is changing people's attitudes. And when they've done online studies, surveys of people's trying to change attitudes of environmental concern, it's very hard unless you get people engaged in the environment. So contact with nature through Blueways, for example, using nature contact as a means to well-being is a very powerful means of changing people's attitudes. And there's a process here, essentially that kind of connectivity you get from green exercise and from being in outdoors and from the Blue Mind experience, that can enhance your environmental concern. So it can change attitudes about the big planetary questions we're talking about in terms of climate change. I'm just going to focus on a couple of pieces of data here. So this is to show how our participants did in terms of well-being. That's a WHO-5 test, and pro-social behavior. So this is one of the key things, that well-being, your state of positive mood, for example, should give you psychological resources. It should empower you to actually care about others. It's a really important human trait in terms of empathy, for example. And essentially, we've got our 5 participants here. We've got them divided into those that are high. So we can some people are similarly high on well-being and high in pro-social behavior, which is what we'd expect. We've got others who are low, but predominantly, and when we look at across the full 19 of our study, it's likely we'll end up with a lot of people that haven't been studied before. They haven't typically looked at athletes and what's their attitudes in the environment, what's their care for others. People looked at attributes more about performance enhancements rather than about caring about the environment. So we actually have an interesting story which is emerging here. Just to explain a little bit further, in terms of these are example of 3 participants who scored very high on 3 different questionnaires. One, nature connectedness, the other, environmental concern, the other, well-being. So the top score you can get on the well-being questionnaire is 80, and they're getting almost a ceiling effect here. I just want to give you 2 examples to finish of quotes. So one is from Rosie Foley, who, if you are from Ireland, you might have known that her brother died tragically about 2 years ago from a heart attack while preparing Munster rugby to play a match in France. And during our interview, we asked Rosie, about how does nature help her, quote, and this is what she said in her own words, and I think it's quite telling. When I'm swimming, I can cry. When I'm swimming, I can do whatever the hell I want. When I'm swimming, and it's me and my own, and it's fine, I'm not upsetting anyone else. I obviously need to be out and getting out and about and actually in there and hearing the birds or in splashing water is what I certainly need. So this idea that people find solace in nature. Just the last quote is from Niamh Briggs, who talked about her injury, and she said, I get into the water every day if I'm at home in Abbeyside in Waterford. I love that. I love the fact I can hear the sounds, what I associate the sound of water with. and the views. I just think it makes and brings me back to a sense of calm. So I think we can all see that these voices and this story can resonate with us. And the key point is that we too can share this experience, and this experience can be tracked, can be measured, can be shared, so that the Blueways aren't just an infrastructure, the idea of build it and they will come, but instead connect them to it and they will return. Thank you.
Thank you, Tadhg. Our next speaker is Barrett. And Brian is a senior executive officer with Galway County Council. And Brian heads up the economic, social and community development section for the council.
That's not good.
Feel free to talk amongst yourselves, folks, while we
Well,
resolve a few technical difficulties.
while you're working on that, I'll talk. So I work with a local authority, a municipality, and traditionally local authorities in Ireland have very narrow sort of operational range. Basically, it's dealing with concrete, where you put concrete, where you don't put concrete, what you do with concrete, and how you repair concrete. The section where I work in is a big mouthful in that it's economic development, it's community development, and it's social inclusion. And it captures a lot of what Tadhg had said there earlier on. And the project I want to talk to you about today kind of covers that broad element. We would have approached it from an economic development perspective, from a community development perspective, and from a social inclusion perspective. You won't get that too often in a local authority, trust me. But it's just the nature of our unit. We would have the cultural section in our unit. We would have the sports partnership in our unit. We have the migrants support unit in there. We have the tourism unit. And you have also got, I'm missing one, the community development unit. So that's a broad spectrum that I oversee. And I come from an economic background and a community development background myself. So that's where we would bring it to that project. I didn't expect this much set up just for me. So basically, just to describe County Galway, for those that aren't familiar with it, Galway, it's just the next parish to here almost. Cross the river, go through Roscommon for about a mile or two, and then you're into Galway, the east of Galway. It's one of the biggest counties in Ireland. It has a huge tourism economy on the west coast, along the Wild Atlantic Way, where you have visitor attractions that would get up to 200,000 or 300,000 a year visitors coming to it, and a strong sort of tourism-based economy over there. And then you have the east of the county, which comes over to the Shannon, which runs along here, and down to Tadhg, where you have much smaller tourism base. Attractions on this side of the county would only get in the region of 4,000 or 5,000. And I would oversee both of those sort of economies. And I would leave a meeting in Clifton where people would be complaining, we aren't getting enough visitors. And then I would come to a meeting in Portumna, which I'll be talking about later. And the Clifton, there's congestion, there's traffic. Most of the sites are being degraded by the volume of tourists that's going to it. And they're complaining they're not getting enough. Then I come to Portumna, where there's about 5,000 visitors coming to some of the attractions there a year. And they're saying they're not getting enough. So it's trying to strike the balance between how we bring some of those tourists to the more remote parts of the county. And I'm going to talk about the project we did in Portumna on that. It was also about bringing new audiences to the Waterway, and it was also doing what is probably the most challenging piece of activity you can do in Ireland is a multi-agency approach. It's an emerging field for Irish organisations to work together, to work on co-projects and stuff like that, and it's a significant challenge to some of the public sector bodies, our own included. So this is Portumna, and I don't have a pointer here, but that's the Shannon that's coming down on the right-hand side there. A tiny bit of a canal that brings it up to the Waterways Ireland offices and Shannon Harbour there. This is Loch Tadhg, and that's Portumna town, about a 1,500 population in the town. The key thing I want you to get about that map is that the town has very little engagement with the water. That's kind of common Irish thing, is that we generally do not engage with water. For an island or country, it beggars belief. But I kayak as well, not to the same streets as Tadhg or anything like that, but I live in Galway City where there's 80,000 people, and I can go kayaking in the evening up the river there in Galway and meet no one. Absolutely no one. It's brilliant. But it's happening less and less as more people engage. But so Irish towns generally don't engage with the rivers or their waterways, and that's a major challenge about what the project we're involved in this case study. The project is down here. Okay, so that's the marine area that we physically, with Waterways Ireland, refurbished. Just down here, you have a blue flag swimming area, okay, that we would manage. You walk up here, back up to Shannon Bridge, and that's a cruise hire up there company. You've Portumna Castle in here, beautiful building, and you have a forest park here, okay, all getting very low levels of tourism traffic and very low levels of town traffic. And the challenge for us was what happened when it started the story is that the hotel, which was here, burnt down. Okay, so that was a major, it was Shannon Oaks. It pulled in a lot of tourism into the town of Portumna, weddings, there's a golf course there, so a lot of golf tours and so on. That was burnt down and was gone, and it's like a lot of small Irish towns at the turn of the century in decline and looking for a way to be regenerated. That's just the Blueway that is in place now, and just to give you the idea, the level of activities and attractions down there. Every time we show this to people who aren't familiar with it, they say it must be a massive tourism resource. There must be huge numbers of visitors going there because of the level of the lake, the river, the forest park, the small towns and villages. There's mountains as well. You get every experience that you can possibly get in the Irish tourism experience in that small circle there. And again, visitor numbers to the castle last year was about 10,000 a year. And that's just an idea of the level of attractions in the town. So they're just fantastic buildings, many derelict. So that's the castle, that's the Priory, Forest Park, that's Church of Ireland, just the streetscape. It's very attractive. It's a very nice town. It's a lovely place to visit, but no one's visiting it. And that's the challenge we have. This is just to give you the sort of what the place was like before we worked with Waterways Ireland to regenerate it. So you have what was a marina area. This is during the winter, so not many boats there, but there would be plenty of boats coming during the summer. We have a water plant, treatment plant, pumping station here that is ours. We have sort of long-term dwellers there that are not really wanted, and that was an issue. During the summer in this area, we were getting complaints on a regular basis of up to 30 or 40 camper vans and RVs coming to this at the bank holiday weekend, antisocial behaviour, a lot of litter, and it causing a problem in the town. And it's about 10-minute walk from there into the town. Traditional local authority approach to that, to resolve that problem, is to put a barrier in, okay, and then make it inaccessible to your RVs. But at the time when I was pulled into this project, and I was pulled into this project, was to address that, and I was determined that we wouldn't put a barrier in there because we were reducing access to an asset. Even if the town didn't see it as an asset, we wanted to maintain that as an asset. Between us all, that's Waterways Ireland, the OPW, the Office of Public Works, owned the castle which neighbours this, Queelsh's Forest neighbours that, and Galway County Council has involvement with the water plant. None of us had any money. So this was around 2007. And the next year we definitely had no money. But it was something that needed to be done. Just give you a few more angles. So it's looking dated, it's tired, and a lot of antisocial behaviour problems. We were lucky enough in that we were able to come together and start looking at, without any idea of money, how would we address that? How would we sort it out? And it's the first time that Galway County Council worked closely with Waterways Ireland. And we felt, because the RVs were coming there, that we need to turn it on its head and sort of generate revenue from them and put in parking and facilities for them, try and regulate it and address the antisocial behaviour problem. So this, just to give you an example again, that's the castle. So the castle looks down over this. It's an absolute gem of a location, and I can see why the camper vans are going there. You're looking out onto the lake, you have forest lands with 36 kilometres of bicycle trails and walking trails, and then you're only about, as you walk back in here, through the Priory and old OPW buildings back into town. Absolutely stunning location. And that's just to see. Some boats did go there before we did anything. So this is generally what we did, is that we tarmacked it, and we put in 18 bays for RVs. Okay, very hard. RV traffic in Ireland has gone up exponentially, but there's very few places where the public sector or public authorities actually give space for RVs to park overnight. You can go into a campsite, but you'll find there's a few. There's one down in Cove, there's one or two in Donegal, and that's about it. And many of those are done through the community or through a third party. So this was to become the first local authority-run managed RV park in Ireland, which, trust me, is a challenge in itself when you have to go into what would be a conservative management and say, we're going to be the first on addressing this problem without a barrier. But we were lucky that a fund came available to develop capital projects on Loch Derg. And we, with Waterways Ireland, put a planning proposal in, highly designated area, because it's nature designations all over the place. In here you have the fishermen, again, who can be challenging in themselves. And then you had the castle and all its environs as well. So we were dealing with a national monument, a protected region, fishermen, and antisocial behaviour. So it used to keep the agenda fairly full at any meetings. I don't want to go through the engineering. I'm not an engineer. I don't think you want to go through the talk about concrete and stuff like that. But that's basically how it was turned around. It's you see the boats. It was all refurbished, the docks and all that. And in the background, you can see where the RVs, they're all got dedicated parking bays. What we've discovered in this journey is that there is no regulation anywhere in Europe that gives you design guidelines for public RV parks. Another challenge to try and discover that. On size-wise, how far they should be apart, fire regulations, all that. All part of the learning curve that Waterways Ireland and ourselves went along and found out new things about. But basically what we were trying to bring a space into a welcoming, attractive location that you'd like to stay. And that's what it's become now. So there is the big challenge that we had there was we've limited the RV numbers to a reasonable number that go down there. Antisocial behaviour is a problem. We had to bring in bylaws, we had to write bylaws, which are challenging in itself, to stop oversupply there. Key challenge there was there's a perception, and I like you have the marketing now to go back to the local groups, but there was a perception in the town that this business was no good to the town, that they just went to Lidl, they shopped in Lidl, they parked down there, and they didn't engage with the town. We had to challenge the town business and say, well, what have you done that will bring them out from their mobile home or their cruiser, come up to your establishment and engage? And that's still a challenge. That's a still challenge that the business say they're not coming up, and you have to say, well, what are you doing to have your music on? No. Have you entertainment of any sort on? Not really. There's no one coming, and it's chicken or egg. And that's where you lead the data that you say, well, these people generally spend this much money, if you know. So that's one challenge that we had engaging the town businesses with this area. But we're working with the Chamber of Commerce on that. Subsequently, we commissioned a study to develop the location as an eco destination, and we got experts in to work with the trade to show how they can get sustainable tourism into this location. Building on items like they have all the assets in place, it's to leverage off them, and that's where we can be weak in the Irish tourism sector, is leveraging off some of the great assets that we have. We generally have great landscape, great monuments, but we're not great at getting money off people to see these things or to experience these things and stuff like that. And that's a learning exercise that we have to engage with the trade. But the other side was people weren't coming down to this location because of the antisocial behaviour. They weren't walking into the forest park this way or anything like that. So with the upgrades that we were able to do for RVs, it means the access road is now lit up and safe. And what we've seen is there's greater engagement by the community doing the loop down along a safe access into the forest park and back up another road. So we're actually seeing them engaging with the waterfront and the lake down here. Just kind of progresses that we made, and we have the regulated parking now. We're charging a tenner a night. We're getting a revenue from. It's not going to make local authority very wealthy, trust me, but it's getting a contribution to maintaining the site that we were maintaining anyway. It's an enhanced amenity for visitors, for the local community, which is probably equally as important. We've seen it starting to generate further investment in that the OPW now have put a tea rooms into the castle, which is right beside it. So there's other investment going in there. The Creelcha have put more money into the Forest Park. They're upgrading their trails. And we're all working together now. We've put in for further funding to develop a greenway which links that area to the Blue Flag bathing area back up to the cruise hire at the bridge. And we will have a greenway loop which brings it back into the town as well. Fingers crossed on that. We should know in the next month. As I said, we commissioned a development plan to try and get the trade, and that was the plan doesn't interest me that much. It's the exercise that the trade had to go through to see how do you make tourism work. That was what we're trying to do. There's a workhouse there, which is a legacy of the famine, and it's a tourism attraction. And again, they're putting more money into their facility to try and engage tourists longer. We've increased revenue, but it's not something that's going to shoot the lights out. We do see increased numbers, and the trade are telling us there's increased numbers coming to the town. The still challenge they have is accommodation base, but they need to work on that. There's investment gone into the Hymany Way, which is a greenway which goes up along the Shannon, the length of the country, and as part of the new tourism destination, the Hidden Heartlands, which Fáilte Ireland are pushing big time. This is connected to it, or will be connected by our greenway. So it'll be part of that Hidden Heartlands. And what we find is this increased engagement by town and trade with lake and amenities. And that's a big thing, is that you're starting to see people kayaking out there. You're starting to see people going down there for their lunch breaks during the summer. There's picnic tables out there. They're making the effort to get down there and relax. And the Tadhg Blueway came subsequent to us starting this journey. Critical thing is the number of stakeholders there. There's a representative of the council. The minister there on the far left is from the OPW side of things. We've Fáilte Ireland and we've Waterways Ireland. And it's been a partnership all the way, and it has been important. There's pros and cons to it. This whole thing, we would have first met down there in 2007. 2017 is when we launched it, and nothing happened in the community's mind for 9 years. Okay, because we were planning, we were getting permissions, we were getting funding, but that is a big challenge to keep everybody on board to that long journey when there mightn't be any sort of concrete happening until towards the end. It takes longer. There's lots of talking through things. Everybody's got issues. Everybody's coming to it different with different priorities. There's lots of meetings. There's delays in getting approvals because when you're doing memorandums of understanding between two agencies, you have to go to boards and you have to go to council meetings and so on. So it is always going to take longer. What the pros of it is you get increased resources. So the different parties can bring different pots to the table. You get integrated services. We're using the power bays for the RVs is the Waterways Ireland Lakeland system. And that means we don't have to invent a whole system and run it just for one space, where we can just piggyback off what Waterways Ireland have. We have sustainability. So different energy goes and comes in agencies and communities. When you have multiple partners around there, different partners have energy at different times for different reasons. Sometimes they get an injection of capital, sometimes they get an injection of new staff. And that keeps sustainability going, whether one agency mightn't just have it. And one agency won't have the resources. You get further development because when you achieve something, the partners come back together and want to do more. That's been my experience. When you do it with partners and it's successful, the final meeting is all about what we do next. And as I say, we've already applied for more money with Waterways Ireland and Quilcha for further development of that area. You'll get better results because you've more minds at the table, you've more ideas at the table, you've more expertise at the table. The key thing in getting these to work is that you have support from chief executives. As I say, my chief executive pulled me in 2007 to that. I was dragged in to solve that problem. And it's the senior managers and chief executives who drive these projects. You have good people in different organisations with a positive approach, and the people in Waterways Ireland were critical in getting this over the line, and in OPW. Sourcing money, a lot of wangling was done to get 10,000 here, 20,000 there, to get around a planning loophole, whatever. There was a lot of work by people hidden away that was done. And agencies need to be flexible. And that can be the challenge for a lot of public sector bodies, is that need to be flexible because the world is changing and dynamic. So that's it. What I'd like you to do, if you get a chance, is visit Tadhg and particularly Portumna. You'll get details on the Blueways that are there and the Visit Portumna website if you want more details, but try and get down and see it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bran, and to all three of our speakers. I'd like to open up the floor to questions. If anyone does have a question, if you put your hand up, Mary will come down with the microphone. So to kick things off, would anyone have a question for Jean?
Sorry, Jean, I just want to ask you about your study. When you said 1,000 people, and you said about people who don't visit and people who do visit. How representative is the number who did the non-visitors of the whole population, or was it just? How did they become part of the study? I mean, it's a very big area. I know the area, and there's millions who don't visit the water. So, I mean, the few people who showed interest, are they representative of the population, or are they just representative of a small number of people who don't visit but they like to know about it?
Well, yeah, so we did try to really make the sample size representative so that we would feel confident about it. And so our researchers felt like 1,000 was fine. And we did ask a question early on, if you haven't visited, would you be interested in visiting? And if you said, no, I haven't visited and I'm not interested, then you got to, thank you very much, we're not really interested. So we did want to hear from people who, prospective visitors, people who said, yes, I might be interested, but I don't know that much, or I just have never been. And that made up about half of the people that we surveyed were non-visitors.
You can probably hear me from there, no?
Okay.
Just put it right there. Yeah, Martin McGuigan from the Southwest College. You had a snapshot taken there of what you have at a particular time, moment in time for your survey. do you carry out any ongoing monitoring of your facility, or is there any monitoring that you would like to have ongoing on a constant basis?
So that we just finished this study in 2017, and I think it's going to be the kind of thing that we would need to repeat on a more major scale, maybe 5 years from now, so that it's ongoing, because we still have the same problem that we don't really have one visitor center for the canal or one place. So individual sites are doing some of the monitoring of their own visitors, of their own, museum or something. But and the canal system itself measures lockages, so they know how many boats are going through. But it's very difficult to do sustained trail counts, although there's some of that data too. So there's different pieces that we get, but this helps kind of give us a bigger picture of what people, where they went and what they did and what they spent and those kinds of things. John?
Thanks, Gene. John Johnston. I'm affiliated with Cornell Navigation, one of the tour boats on the Erie Canal. But my question's kind of coming out of my position with Waterway Guide. I'm an editor for them for the Erie Canal. It falls back to the questions around the shortened season, or is there going to be a permanently shortened season, which is reducing the number of operational days by about 50 based on the last 2 years. Businesses, the hire boat companies, the tour boat companies are all saying that they are facing declines in revenue because of this. And the other question that pertains to Waterway Guide is people are trying to plan these great loop cruises well more than a year in advance. So we're finding that their questions are basically unanswered. The other part of it, the last 2 years, the Canal Corporation has waived the requirement for a recreational permit for boats. It doesn't appear to me that there's any way that they are counting boat traffic. And in your study, you're showing that boaters are one of the higher revenue segments contributing. So if they're not counting them and they're contributing a lot of revenue, it seems to leave a gap in the information.
So I'm with the Erie Canalway and not with Canal Corporation, but I think you're right that when you shorten a season by 2 weeks on either end, it has an impact. And just even kind of, yeah, right. It's the fall season that's significant. Yeah. So I don't know if there was a question in there.
Well, yeah, there is. One is the negative economic impact to businesses along the
Yeah.
canal, and two is, while we're trying to gather data,
Right, then
by
we have
not
a
getting
missing
permits,
piece.
they're missing the opportunity to acquire the data. Tour boats, they count the passengers every time they go through a lock.
Right. I think we're still measuring lockages. Yes. We still measure what boats are going through the locks.
Really?
Folks, I'm conscious of the time. We're
Yes.
moving into
All
our
right,
tea break
thank you.
period. So could it maybe one last question for Jean
Right.
and open up to the other two
Yeah.
presenters as well at this stage?
I'm just interested in how you found out what method you would be the best for your study.
Part of it was, you kind of weigh the different approaches that people are coming at you with and their experience in doing those things. So, you can throw out half the RFPs right off the bat kind of because you just feel like they're just not well put together. There's just not the experience there. And then we were down to a couple, and we just felt like we wanted that kind of more hard statistical numbering, and we wanted the qualitative information, but we already kind of had that from our own experience. So that's why we went with more of the quantitative data. So it sort of depends too on what you feel you need when you're
So
looking
it's
at that.
just like that.
We had a lot of this in our discussions, but yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions, folks, to our other speakers?
Okay.
enjoyed all your presentations. To come back to the sort of the title and engaging our audience, and I noticed in that picture of your caravan site, RV site, there was a marquee in the corner, and we're all dealing with these customers who we hear lots of talk about the next generation of millennials and all this sort of thing, but also the older generation who are still enthusiastic but less fit, for want of a better word. When it comes to events and things, between the three of you, what brings people in? What drives what gets people off their sort of remote controlled TV sets? Because you painted the picture of the person running the wood and enjoying the sights and sounds. Well, to me, the modern person running the wood with his headphones on doesn't get that. So what events and things are you finding that brings people to your?
Yeah, we're finding a whole different range, and this not just in Portland, but in many places, it's for all age groups. We're finding it with cultural events linked to the water. So a lot of arts events which are using the festival in Portland is called Shorelines, and they try and engage the water in arts activities. But you'll have sporting ones, but they're more sporting across the spectrum, that it's not competitive, it's a tryout. The key thing we had to do is tell the local community. We had, with Waterways Ireland, we had all the suppliers of activities come in and do sort of town weekends for the local townspeople to try out the events and activities that are in their own area, because there's a lack of awareness in those areas. So when you go into a pub there on Friday night and you ask the guy sitting beside, what's there to do around here, and he look up at you, slowly think, and then go, there's nothing to do here. You know, and there'll be horse riding, there'll be a hurling game on, there'll be a football game, there'll be an arts event on. He won't be aware of it because he's not engaging because he's in the pub. But it's a key thing is that we find that people all across generations are looking for activity experiences. They're looking for something that they can put on their social media and say, I did this at the weekend. You have to, and what the challenge is, how, and we find this in all sizes of cities and towns, how do you finance those? Because community are running these activities, but they need funding to do it, so they come to local authorities, we've limited funding, they go to local business and they have a challenge getting sponsorship. But you have to put on those community events, because people are looking for those experiences. Be it storytelling, history, arts, I don't think there's any particular right or wrong. The psychologists there might know more.
There's a lot of uncharted territory about what you just said. So the key thing is you have to create an electronic footprint of people's activity in the outdoors. If for the millennials, you want them to return and to share that. So you flip the tech on its head. Instead of being a barrier to nature contact, you say, take photos, use Instagram, create a hashtag for a particular area, use an app. So we looked with one of the world's leading architecture firms called Gensler, is how to map emotions to places. So you might end up with, we have many maps of the Blueways, and Athlone, for example. You might end up with a map which can go onto Google Earth, it can be transposed onto it. And it indicates the areas where people have different feelings. Here's an area which is quiet, here's a tranquil area, here's an exciting area. So you look at a map, the millennials who like these kind of taglines, people younger than me, might understand this, and that becomes like an anchor point or like a magnet for them. So that the idea that they can share this, I think, is really, really important. So instead of nature being a privileged experience, like even some of the examples we use, it's quite privileged going to a lake or kayaking by yourself on the Carb. The idea that it's a shared electronic multimedia experience is something we have to think about.
Anyone else? Just maybe a comment that I would have. I think for me, certainly the theme coming across all three presentations was the importance of collaboration. And it's important to get people all singing off the same hymn sheet with a single vision moving forward. So I suppose a question, pardon me, to any three of you would be, how difficult or easy did you find it in any or each of your settings to bring that together into a single vision with the competing demands of each of the partners? Maybe Brian, I'm thinking of you really, because I know we're one of the partners.
Yeah, it was incredibly challenging. As I say, the local authority response to antisocial behaviour down a site or a location. And it's changing mindsets to say, no, we need to turn this around and make it more, give, I don't know, greater responsibility to the locals that they would mind the location rather than it being left abandoned in a way. But that was a challenge in our organisation, to try and get our mindsets different. It's just, it takes more work when you're engaging with another agency or agencies. And that's just, it's just harder. It's going to take longer. It's the nature of the beast. You're not going to get around it. And you just have to say, right, okay, there is benefits from us engaging with this other partners. And we'll do the extra work because of those benefits.
I think for me, and I do a lot of partnership work, I think of them as relationships with a